A single father found a note in his son's backpack. The author was the teacher who would change his life forever. An unexpected romance, secrets revealed, and two lives transformed. Get ready to be moved. Subscribe, give a thumbs up, and comment on where you're watching from. The March morning arrived with that typical humid heat of New York, as spring slowly insisted on saying goodbye to winter. In the small kitchen of his apartment in Brooklyn, David Johnson adjusted his reading glasses while preparing breakfast for himself and Ethan. At 42, his temples already displayed grey strands that contrasted with his expressive brown eyes, a trademark of the Johnson family. His stubbly beard and slightly wrinkled dress shirt betrayed the morning rush of a single father, balancing parenthood with a demanding career. "Ethan, come have breakfast before it gets cold," he shouted toward the bedroom, where his 8-year-old son was struggling with his shoelaces. David sighed, running his hand through his dark, wavy hair. Since Sarah had left 3 years ago, leaving only a note explaining that she wasn't cut out to be a mother, each morning had been a small battle won. Ethan appeared in the kitchen, dragging his navy blue backpack across the floor. He was a slender boy, with the same brown eyes as his father, but a shy smile that hid the sharp intelligence behind his struggles with reading. His cheeks still retained the roundness of childhood, and his light brown hair always seemed to have a life of its own, resisting any attempt at styling. "Dad, Miss Emily said there's a meeting today about my progress," Ethan murmured, absent-mindedly poking at his buttered toast. "Will you be able to make it?" David mentally checked his schedule. As a civil engineer specializing in the restoration of historic buildings, his days were filled with site visits and endless meetings. That week, he was supervising the restoration of a historic mansion in Chinatown, a project that required constant attention. "Of course I'll be there, champ. I would never miss a meeting about you," he replied, masking the worry in his voice. He knew Ethan was struggling in school, especially with reading. The letters seemed to dance on the page for the boy, turning simple words into complex puzzles. As Ethan finished his breakfast, David organized his son's backpack, checking to see if all the supplies were in place. It was then that his fingers found a folded paper between the pages of the English notebook. At first, he thought it was some forgotten assignment, but when he unfolded the note, he realized it was addressed to him. The handwriting was delicate, with feminine and careful strokes that revealed patience and attention to detail. Each letter seemed to have been formed with care, creating words that flowed like a gentle melody on the paper. "Mr. Johnson, I have observed that Ethan has shown remarkable progress in his concentration during our shared reading activities. His sensitivity and emotional intelligence are truly exceptional. I have noticed that he expresses himself better through drawings and oral narratives, suggesting that his brilliant mind simply processes information differently than most. I would like to discuss some strategies that could further enhance his unique talents. With pedagogical affection, Mrs. Emily Carter." David reread the note 3 times, feeling something stir in his chest. It wasn't just the content. Other teachers had sent notes about Ethan before. It was the way she had written it, the careful choice of words, how she had transformed his son's difficulties into special qualities. There was a sensitivity there that touched on something he thought he had lost forever. "Dad, are you okay? You look funny," Ethan observed, slinging his backpack over his shoulder. "I'm fine, buddy. Miss Emily wrote some really nice things about you," David said, carefully folding the note and putting it in his shirt pocket. "How about we tell her that you managed to read that adventure book we bought?" Ethan's face lit up. "I really did. It took a while, but I understood the whole story about the pirate and the treasure. During the drive to school, in the chaotic city traffic, David couldn't get the note out of his mind. How long had it been since someone had shown such attention and care for Ethan? How long had it been since he himself had received such kind words about his parenting? Maplewood Elementary School was located in Greenpoint, a two-story building with faded yellow walls and large windows that tried to capture all the morning light possible. The playground was small but cozy, with leafy trees providing shade during recess and colourful murals created by the students themselves. "Bye, Dad! Don't forget about the meeting!" Ethan shouted, running toward the gate, where other parents were saying goodbye to their children. David stayed in the car for a few extra minutes, watching the school activity. That's when he saw her for the first time consciously. A woman of average height, with dark brown hair tied in a casual bun, wearing a moss-green dress that accentuated her expressive green eyes. She greeted each child by name at the entrance, bending down to their level, offering genuine smiles that lit up her delicate face. Emily Carter was 38 years old and carried the responsibility of shaping young minds with special needs on her shoulders. Her passion for inclusive education had arisen from her experience with her younger brother, who had Down syndrome. From a young age, she had learned that each person possesses a unique type of intelligence, needing only someone willing to discover the right key to unlock it. That morning, as she watched Ethan run around the playground with his peers, Emily felt a special satisfaction. The boy was more confident, more willing to participate in activities. It was the result of the joint work between school and family, although she suspected that the father might not realize how much his patience and dedication positively influenced his son's progress. David finally started the car, but the note continued to burn in his pocket like a promise of something. David drove through the familiar streets of the neighborhood. The Italian bakery where he bought bread every Sunday, the cafe where he sometimes stopped for a quick espresso, the park where he took Ethan to play on weekends. Everything seemed the same, but something had changed within him. At the office, located in a commercial building in the downtown area, David tried to focus on the architectural projects spread across his desk. The plans for the restoration of the historic mansion required attention to the smallest details. Every ornament, every original element needed to be preserved and restored with surgical precision. It was a job that demanded patience, historical sensitivity, and a passion for cultural preservation. "Good morning, Dave. How's the Chinatown project going?" asked Marcelo, his partner and best friend since college, entering the room with 2 coffees in hand. "Going well. The owner approved our proposal to restore the original frescoes," David replied, gratefully accepting the coffee. "But I need to leave early today. I have a meeting at Ethan's school." Marcelo, a tall and thin man with round glasses, had known David for over 15 years. He could recognize when something was affecting his friend's emotions. Problems? No, quite the opposite. His teacher, she wrote something very special about Ethan. David showed the note, watching as Marcelo read it carefully. "This teacher has a way with words, and from what you tell me, she really understands Ethan." Marcelo returned the paper with a sly smile. "Interesting how one person can capture so much in just a few lines, don't you think?" David tucked the note away again, feeling his cheeks slightly warm. "It's just her professionalism. Ethan needs special attention, and she's doing her job." Sure, Marcelo agreed, but his tone suggested he sensed something more in his friend's reaction. "What time is the meeting?" 4 in the afternoon. I hope it doesn't run too long." David turned his attention back to the plans, but his thoughts kept drifting to the school, to the note, to that delicate handwriting that seemed to carry more than just educational information. The rest of the morning passed in a haze of questionable productivity. David reviewed the same documents 3 times, made calls that could have been postponed, and found himself glancing at the clock with embarrassing frequency. At 3 o'clock, he decided he couldn't concentrate on anything else. "I'm heading to the school," he announced, grabbing his jacket and car keys. "Good luck at the meeting," Marcelo said, not looking up from his own projects. And David, sometimes the best things in life come when we least expect them. During the drive back to Greenpoint, David reflected on his friend's words. For the past 3 years, since Sarah had passed away, he had built a secure routine focused solely on Ethan and work. There was no room for surprises, for changes, for possibilities. But that note had planted a seed of curiosity that grew with each rereading. He arrived at the school 15 minutes early and decided to wait in the playground, watching the children play during the afternoon recess. Ethan was at the center of a small group, animatedly gesturing as he told some story. David smiled, seeing how his son had found his place among his peers. "Mr. Johnson?" A feminine voice behind him made him turn quickly. Emily Carter approached with a warm smile and a folder of papers in her hands. "You arrived early. That's great. We can talk more calmly." Up close, David noticed details he had missed that morning. The small, silver, book-shaped earrings, the absent engagement ring, the tiny laugh lines around her eyes that suggested someone who smiled often. Her voice had a melodic, measured tone, like someone used to being listened to attentively. "Ms. Carter, thank you for the note. It was, very touching." The words came out more laden with emotion than he intended. Emily felt something stir in her chest upon hearing the sincerity in that father's voice. In her 15 years of teaching, she had encountered all types of parents, the absent, the overly present, the anxious, the indifferent. But there was something in the way David Johnson spoke about his son that touched a part of herself she kept carefully guarded. "Ethan is a very special child," she said, indicating a bench under a tree where they could sit. "I want you to know that you are doing an exceptional job as a father." David felt a tightness in his chest. He rarely heard words of encouragement about his parenting, and coming from a woman who dedicated her life to understanding children like Ethan, they carried special weight. As they walked toward the bench, both carried the sense that that afternoon would be the beginning of something completely new and transformative in their lives. Emily's classroom was a refuge of soft colors and careful organization. The walls, painted in light green, housed lovingly framed children's drawings, educational maps, and a bookshelf filled with books of varying sizes and thicknesses. David observed every detail while waiting for Emily to organize the materials about Ethan on her light wood desk, where a small vase with violets added delicacy to the academic environment. "Please have a seat," Emily said, indicating a chair she had strategically placed next to her desk instead of the traditional front-facing position, a gesture David interpreted as an attempt to create a more collaborative and less intimidating environment. The afternoon light filtered through the sheer curtains, creating a warm atmosphere that contrasted sharply with the memories David had of his own school meetings during childhood. Emily had changed from her moss green dress into a white cotton blouse and a navy midi skirt, maintaining the understated elegance that seemed to be her trademark. "I'd like to start by showing you some of Ethan's recent work," Emily said, opening an organized folder with colorful dividers. "Look at this essay about my family." David leaned in to observe the sheet of paper. During lunch, Ethan had written in his still-developing handwriting, "My dad is the best in the world. He renovates old houses. I want to be like him. We like to read together and eat pizza on Sundays. Dad always helps me when the letters get mixed up." "The letters get mixed up," David repeated softly, feeling a tightness in his chest. This was how Ethan described his dyslexia, with the innocence of someone who did not yet fully understand his differences. "I've noticed he has a very mature understanding of his difficulties," Ms. Helena observed, her voice filled with genuine admiration. "And look at how he values your profession. Renovates old houses is a poetic definition of what you do, don't you think?" David smiled, touched by his son's perspective on his work. "He has always been interested in the projects I bring home. Sometimes he spends hours looking at the blueprints, asking questions about every detail. That shows he has a highly developed spatial intelligence, Ms. Helena explained, pulling another sheet from the folder. Look at this drawing he made during our activity about professions. The paper showed a colorful drawing where a tall male figure wearing a yellow hard hat stood next to a building with surprisingly accurate architectural details for an 8-year-old. Beside him, a smaller figure held the man's hand, both smiling under a radiant sun. Ethan has exceptional visual perception, Ms. Helena continued, pointing out the details in the drawing. Notice how he captured proportions, symmetry, even decorative elements of the construction. This suggests that his mind processes visual information much more efficiently than textual information. David studied the drawing with the eyes of a specialist, impressed by the precision of the lines and attention to detail. I never realized he observed so much. Children with dyslexia often develop extraordinary compensatory skills, Ms. Helena explained, leaning slightly toward David. Ethan doesn't just observe, he analyzes, understands, and reproduces visual information with a capacity that many adults lack. For the next 30 minutes, Ms. Helena showcased a carefully organized collection of Ethan's work. There were drawings of imaginary blueprints, fantastic constructions made with blocks during math activities, and even a rudimentary model of a house he had created during recess using recyclable materials. Ms. Helena, David said, his voice heavy with emotion. Can I ask a personal question? Ms. Helena felt her heart race slightly, but maintained a serene expression. Of course, feel free. How do you manage to see so much beauty in children's difficulties? I mean, other teachers always focused on what Ethan can't do. You seem to find treasures where others see only problems. The question caught Ms. Helena off guard. She lowered her eyes to her hands clasped in her lap, and David noticed how her delicate fingers trembled slightly before she responded. I have a brother, Michael, who was born with Down syndrome, Ms. Helena said, her voice taking on a more intimate tone. From a young age, I learned that intelligence manifests in many different ways. Michael taught me that limitation is just a limited perspective of the observer. David watched as Ms. Helena's face softened when she spoke of her brother, a genuine tenderness replacing her professional demeanor. During my training in special education, I discovered that my greatest calling was precisely this, to find the unique ways each child shines. Ms. Helena lifted her eyes to meet David's gaze. Ethan shines brightly, Mr. David. He just needs someone to recognize his specific type of light. Please, just call me David, he requested, feeling that the formality had become an unnecessary barrier between them. David, Miss Helena repeated, testing the name on her tongue. Can I ask how it has been for you to raise Ethan alone? I know it's not easy to balance work and fatherhood. The question was direct, but it was phrased with such care that David did not feel invaded. Instead, he experienced a strange relief at having someone who finally seemed to understand the complexity of his situation. Some days are harder than others, David admitted, running a hand through his hair, especially when he comes home from school frustrated because he couldn't keep up with an activity. I feel lost, not knowing how to help. That's completely normal and shows how much you care, Ms. Helena assured him. Can I suggest some strategies that have worked well here at school? For the next 20 minutes, Ms. Helena outlined a detailed plan of activities that David could develop at home with Ethan. She explained multisensory reading techniques, educational, games that would boost the boy's self-esteem, and methods to turn difficulties into opportunities for discovery. One thing I've noticed is that Ethan responds very well to visual narratives, Ms. Helena said, showing a notebook where the boy had created a rudimentary comic book. "How about you both create stories together? You could draw scenarios based on your architectural projects, and Ethan could invent adventures that take place in those settings." David examined the notebook, impressed with his son's creativity. "This is brilliant. Why didn't I think of this before?" "Because sometimes we need an outside perspective to see what is right in front of us," Miss Helena replied with a smile. "And also because you are doing everything right, instinctively. Ethan is a happy and confident child because he feels your unconditional love." The meeting was coming to an end when Ethan appeared at the door of the classroom, still with his backpack on and rosy cheeks from running. "Dad, Ms. Helena, are you talking about me?" he asked with the typical curiosity of his age. "We're talking about how special and smart you are," Ms. Helena said, opening her arms to welcome the boy in a warm embrace. "It's true, champ. Ms. Helena showed me your work that I didn't even know existed," David added, ruffling his son's hair. Ethan beamed with pride. "Ms. Helena, can you teach my dad to play those word games you play with me?" Ms. Helena and David exchanged a glance that lasted a fraction of a second longer than necessary. "It would be a pleasure," said Emily, feeling a strange flutter in her heart. "Maybe we can schedule another meeting to discuss more specific strategies." "Sure," agreed David, perhaps with more enthusiasm than the situation warranted. "When would be convenient for you?" "How about next Thursday, same time? That way we can assess how Ethan responded to the initial activities." "Perfect," said David, already mentally reorganizing his schedule for the week. As they left the school, Ethan chattered excitedly about his day, but David found himself torn between listening to his son and processing everything that had happened that afternoon. Emily was not just a dedicated teacher. She was a woman who had found a way to see the world that touched him deeply. In the car, during the drive home, Ethan continued talking about school. "Dad, Miss Emily is really nice, right? She always knows how to explain things in a way I understand." "Yes, son. She's a very special teacher." "And she's pretty too," Ethan added with the disarming honesty of children. "Don't you think?" David nearly choked on the direct question. Yes, she is a beautiful person," he replied, choosing his words carefully. "Mom was beautiful too, but in a different way. Miss Emily seems more, how do you say, more cheerful." His son's observation hit David like a punch in the stomach. Ethan rarely mentioned his mother, and when he did, it was always with that insight that surprised and hurt at the same time. That night, after Ethan fell asleep, David found himself in the kitchen rereading Emily's note for the 10th time. Her words about Ethan, the way she had conducted the meeting, the care she had shown both father and son, all of this created a sense of possibility he hadn't felt in years. He carefully tucked the note into his wallet, next to the photo of Ethan, and for the first time in a long time, he fell asleep thinking about the future instead of reliving the past. In Greenpoint, in her small but cozy apartment, Emily also reflected on the afternoon. There was something about the way David spoke about Ethan, the evident dedication he showed as a father, that touched her unexpectedly. It wasn't just professionalism that motivated her to help that family. It was something deeper and more unsettling that she wasn't ready to name yet. The following week passed with a strange sense of anticipation for David. Each morning as he dropped Ethan off at school, his eyes instinctively searched for Emily in the playground. When he found her greeting the children, he felt an inexplicable satisfaction that accompanied him throughout his workday. It was as if a small light had turned on in his monochromatic routine. On Thursday, David arrived at the school 15 minutes early again. This time, he decided to wait at the small cafe on the corner of the school. A family-owned establishment with only 6 dark wooden tables and the constant aroma of freshly brewed Brazilian coffee and coffee cake. The owner, Mr. Antonio, an elderly man with grey moustaches and an always immaculate apron, knew all the parents in the area and had the gift of making each customer feel at home. "Good afternoon, sir. The usual?" Mr. Antonio asked, already preparing the double espresso that David usually ordered on weekends when he was out with Ethan. "Actually, today I'm going for coffee with milk," David replied, surprising himself. He didn't know why he had changed his usual choice, but something about that afternoon called for a different decision. As he waited, David watched the street activity through the window. Greenpoint, in the late afternoon, had a special charm. Mothers pushing strollers, students laden with books, street artists preparing their instruments for the evening performances. It was a neighborhood that breathed diversity and creativity, very different from the more traditional environment of Brooklyn where he lived. That's when he saw Emily walking down the sidewalk, carrying a colorful fabric bag and a small bouquet of yellow flowers. She wore a patterned dress with small blue flowers and low sandals that accentuated her smooth and confident stride. Her hair, which had been tied back in the previous meeting, now fell loosely over her shoulders, creating a delicate frame for her face. David instinctively stood up when she passed in front of the cafe, and their eyes met through the glass. Emily stopped, smiled and waved, causing a flutter in his heart that caught him completely off guard. "Miss Emily," David called, stepping out of the cafe. "You arrived early too." "David, what a coincidence to find you here," Emily said, approaching with the warm smile he was beginning to recognize as her trademark. "I always pass by this cafe after classes. Mr. Antonio makes the best coffee cake in the area." "Really? I've never tried it. Ethan and I usually come here on Saturdays, but we always order the same thing." "Oh, you guys are Mr. Antonio's regulars?" "He always comments about a father and son who come here on weekends and order espresso with hot chocolate," Emily said, her eyes sparkling with recognition. "You're the engineer who restores old houses." David was surprised. "He mentioned us?" "Mr. Antonio knows the whole neighborhood. He said he's always curious to learn more about the work you do, but he's too discreet to ask directly." Emily laughed, a melodic sound that made David smile automatically. "He has a theory that people who work preserving the past have interesting stories to tell." "Well, I don't know if my story is interesting, but my work definitely is," David replied. "Actually, I'm restoring a historic mansion in Chinatown that has a fascinating story. It was built in 1920 by a family of Japanese immigrants." Emily tilted her head slightly, showing genuine interest. "It must be incredible to discover the history behind each building. What is it like to work, bringing the past back to life?" "Yes, it's like being a detective and an artist at the same time," David explained, getting excited about the topic. "Every peeling wall tells a story. Every preserved ornament carries memories of entire families. In the historic mansion I'm restoring now, we found love letters written in Japanese, hidden behind a false wall." "How romantic!" exclaimed Emily, her eyes lighting up. "Did you manage to translate them?" "We did. It was correspondence between the family patriarch and his wife, who stayed in Japan during the early years of immigration. The letters talk about longing, hope, and building a new life in America." David paused, realizing he was speaking with more passion than he usually showed. "Sorry, I think I got carried away." "Don't apologize. It's beautiful to see someone talk about their work with so much love," Emily said sincerely. "Actually, this reminds me of something. Would you know if that Art Deco building on Augusta Street still retains its original features?" David was surprised again. "You're interested in architecture?" "Well, I've lived in an apartment in that building for 5 years, Emily laughed. "I've always been curious about its history. The older neighbors tell stories about the carnival balls that used to happen on the terrace in the 1940s. "The Copacabana building," David exclaimed. "It's one of the best preserved examples of residential Art Deco in New York. It was designed by architect Reno Levi in 1941. You live in a little architectural gem." Emily smiled, touched by his enthusiasm. "Now I understand why Ethan is fascinated when you talk about buildings. It's contagious." They both fell silent for a few seconds, absorbing the coincidence. David couldn't believe that Emily lived in one of the buildings he admired most in the city, and Emily felt strangely moved to discover she lived in a place David considered special. "How about we go into the cafe?" David suggested. "We still have a few minutes before the meeting, and you can show me that famous coffee cake." "Great idea," Emily agreed. Inside the cafe, Mr. Antonio greeted them with a particularly wide smile. Well, you two know each other. Miss Emily, this is Engineer David, whom I always mention. David, this is Miss Emily, who knows all the secrets of early childhood education in the area." David and Emily exchanged a playful glance, realizing that Mr. Antonio had been an involuntary matchmaker all these months. "Mr. Antonio, you never told me that Miss Emily lived in the Copacabana building," David said, settling into the small table by the window. "Oh, I didn't know that," replied the shopkeeper, bringing coffee too. Emily, without her needing to ask, "So you live close to each other then?" "Well, not exactly close," Emily said. "David lives in Brooklyn, right?" "How do you know?" David asked, surprised. Emily blushed slightly. "Ethan mentioned it in one of his essays. He wrote about how you walk to the Italian bakery on Sundays and buy fresh bread for breakfast." David smiled, imagining his son describing their Sunday mornings. "Giuseppe's Italian bakery. Ethan loves the cornetti he makes." "Giuseppe is my neighbor," exclaimed Emily. "My apartment is right across from the bakery. On Sunday mornings, the smell of fresh bread wafts through my window." David fell silent for a moment, processing the information. For 3 years, every Sunday, he and Ethan had walked to that bakery. Emily had lived there for 5 years. How had they never crossed paths? "It's amazing how small New York can feel sometimes," Emily murmured, as if reading his thoughts. "It really is. How many times have we passed each other without even noticing?" David agreed. Mr. Antonio, who had been listening to the whole conversation while organizing the cups behind the counter, approached the table, carrying a tray with generous slices of coffee, cake. "You know something?" he said with the Portuguese accent he maintained after 40 years in America. "I've been watching you two for a long time, not knowing you knew each other. David, you always seem like a man carrying the world on his shoulders, but today you're different, lighter. And Emily, you've always been cheerful, but today you have a special sparkle in your eyes." David and Emily looked at each other, both slightly embarrassed, but also touched by the shopkeeper's kind observation. "Mr. Antonio is an incorrigible romantic," Emily said, trying to divert attention from the intimate moment that had formed. "At 68, I've learned that life is too short not to notice when two special people meet," Mr. Antonio replied with a wink, returning to behind the counter. David tasted the coffee cake, trying to ignore the whirlwind of emotions that the shopkeeper's words had stirred. The sweet treat melted in his mouth with a homemade flavor and perfect texture. "Ethan is going to want to try this next Sunday," he said, breaking the silence. "I'm sure Giuseppe will be happy to meet you both in person," Emily replied. "He always asks about the families in the, area." They chatted for another 15 minutes about small talk, the best places in the neighborhood, restaurants they recommended, the farmers' market on Wednesdays. But beneath the casual conversation, both felt a subtle current of connection that went beyond the relationship between father and teacher. When they finally headed to the school, walking side by side on the cobblestone sidewalk, David realized he hadn't thought about work all afternoon. It was a strange and liberating feeling. "David," Emily said when they reached the school gate, "can I confess something?" Of course. When I wrote that first note about Ethan, I wasn't just thinking about the educational part, she admitted, looking directly into his eyes. I was thinking about the man who could raise such a caring and intelligent child on his own. I wanted to know the person behind that dedication. David felt his heart race. "Emily, I know it may seem inappropriate to mix the professional with the personal," she quickly continued, "but after our conversation last week, I couldn't stop thinking about our connection. And now, discovering all these coincidences, I can't stop thinking either," interrupted David gently. "About you, the way you talk about Ethan, the way you see the world." They stood still at the gate for a few seconds that felt eternal, absorbing the significance of those mutual confessions. "What do we do now?" Emily asked quietly. "I think we continue to be honest with each other," David replied, "and see where that takes us." Emily smiled, feeling an immense relief for having verbalized her feelings. "So, how about we start this meeting talking about Ethan, and then maybe we can uncover more about all these coincidences." "Perfect," agreed David, opening the gate for her to pass. As they walked toward the classroom, both knew that that afternoon would mark the beginning of something much bigger than they had imagined. The second meeting in Emily's classroom had a completely different atmosphere from the first. There was a subtle intimacy in the air, a mutual awareness that transformed every casual gesture into something laden with meaning. David watched as Emily organized the materials on the table with delicate and precise movements, while she felt his gaze as a warm presence that warmed her skin. "Before we talk about Ethan," said Emily, settling into the chair next to David, "I need to show you something I discovered this week." She opened a drawer in the desk and pulled out a book with a worn cover. David recognized it immediately. The Hour of the Star by Clarice Lispector. "Ethan mentioned during a reading activity that you read together before bed," Emily explained, flipping through the pages marked with small colored papers. "When I asked what kind of stories he likes the most, he said that his dad reads stories about people who think a lot about life." David laughed, recognizing his son's peculiar description. "Since he was little, he has listened to excerpts from Brazilian literature. It started with Monteiro Lobato, but he has always shown curiosity for the more complex books I read." "Well," said Emily, opening the book to a specific page, "last night, rereading this passage here, I remembered the conversation we had about your work with restoration." She read aloud. "She didn't know that she was what she was, just as a dog doesn't know it's a dog. Therefore, she didn't feel unhappy. The only thing she wanted was to live." Emily looked up at David. "Don't you think your work has a lot to do with this, giving new life to buildings that have lost the notion of what they were?" David was silent for a few seconds, impressed with the connection she had made. "I had never thought of it that way, but it makes perfect sense. Every building I restore is like giving it a chance to remember its own identity." "And Ethan," Emily continued, "has that same relationship with words. They exist, he knows they exist, but he hasn't fully discovered what they represent for him. Our job is to help him recognize himself in them." David leaned slightly toward Emily, fascinated by the depth of her reflection. "How do you manage to make these connections between literature, architecture, pedagogy?" Emily smiled, feeling seen in a way she hadn't experienced in a long time. "I think people who work in preservation, whether of buildings or developing minds, develop a special sensitivity to perceive patterns and connections." "Do you read a lot of Clarice?" David asked. "Since my teenage years. My mum was a Portuguese teacher and introduced me to Brazilian classics very early." Emily ran her fingers over the pages of the book. And you? How did you discover literature? My dad was a construction worker and my mom cleaned houses for wealthy families in the South Side, David shared, his voice taking on a more intimate tone. She always came home with books that the employers were going to discard. She said that knowledge was the only inheritance she could leave me. Emily felt a deep emotion hearing him talk about his origins. Is she still alive? She passed away when Ethan was 3. Cancer, David replied, the pain still evident in his voice. She got to meet her grandson, but she couldn't follow his growth. I think she would be proud to see how he has developed. I'm sure she would be, Emily said softly, briefly touching his hand in a spontaneous gesture of comfort. The touch lasted only a few seconds, but it was enough to create an electric current between them. David looked at Emily's delicate hands, noticing how her fingers were long and expressive, like someone used to gesturing while explaining complex concepts to children. And your family? David asked, trying to keep the focus on the conversation while processing the intensity of that simple touch. My parents still live in Springfield, where I grew up, Emily said. My dad is an accountant. My mom is a retired teacher. And there's Michael, my younger brother, who lives with me. Ah, the brother you mentioned. The one who taught you to see intelligence differently. Emily nodded. Michael is 32, works in a bakery as an assistant, and is one of the wisest people I know. He taught me that happiness has nothing to do with meeting society's expectations. It must be special to be around him. It is. Michael has a unique way of seeing the world. Sometimes he observes Ethan when I come to pick him up from school and always comments on how the boy has light in his eyes. He has an incredible intuition for perceiving special children. David smiled, imagining Michael observing Ethan. I would love to meet him someday. And he would love to meet you and Ethan, Emily replied, before realizing the implication of her words. A comfortable silence settled between them. Emily, David said after a few moments, can I ask a more personal question? Of course. Why did you choose special education? I know you talked about Michael, but I imagine there's more to the story. Emily took a deep breath, preparing to share, something she rarely discussed. When I was at 15, Michael went through a very difficult phase. He attended a regular school, but the teachers didn't know how to handle his needs. He would come home frustrated, sometimes crying, saying he was stupid. David felt a tightness in his chest, remembering the times Ethan had come home with similar feelings. I spent months researching, reading, trying to find ways to help him, continued Emily. I discovered that the problem wasn't with Michael, but with how traditional education dealt with differences. I decided that when I grew up, I would dedicate myself to creating environments where children like him could thrive. And did it work? With Michael? We moved him to a specialized school, and it was as if we had found his true personality. In 6 months, he was confident, happy, discovering talents we didn't even know existed. Emily's face lit up with the memory. That's when I decided I wanted to be the teacher I wished Michael had found from the beginning. David fell silent, absorbing the story. Ethan is very lucky to have you. It's not luck, Emily said, looking directly into his eyes. It's a choice. I chose to work with children like Ethan because I believe they have so much to teach the world. And I, David said, surprising himself with his own courage, am very lucky to have found you. Emily felt her heart race. David, I know this might complicate things, he continued, but I can't pretend that what I feel for you is just professional gratitude. Emily lowered her eyes to the book in her hands. I can't pretend either. Since that first meeting, you haven't left my thoughts. What do we do about it? David asked softly. I don't know, Emily admitted. I've never gotten emotionally involved with a student's parent. There are ethical issues to consider, professional protocols. I understand, David said, though his expression showed disappointment. But, Emily continued, raising her eyes to meet his again, maybe we can explore this connection outside the school environment as two people who are interested in each other, regardless of the circumstances that brought us together. David smiled, feeling a wave of relief and anticipation. Would you be willing to do that? Yes, Emily replied, her voice filled with determination and nervousness. But we need to be careful. Ethan is our priority, and we can't let this affect his educational environment. I completely agree, David said. Ethan first, always. Emily looked at the clock on the wall and realized they had spent 40 minutes talking about their lives and only 10 minutes discussing Ethan's school progress. I think we should talk about activities for Ethan, she said, trying to refocus on professional matters, even though her heart was still racing. Of course, David agreed, but they both knew that the dynamic between them had changed, irreversibly. During the next 15 minutes, Emily showed the progress Ethan was making in visual reading activities, the games, that had resulted in improved concentration, and the techniques David could apply at home. But even while focused on the pedagogical aspect, there was a constant awareness of each other. The way she gestured while explaining, how he leaned in to better observe the materials, the moments when their hands accidentally brushed while handling the papers. Ethan is responding very well to the strategies we've implemented, Emily concluded. His self-esteem is higher, and he shows more willingness to face challenges. I can attribute that not just to the techniques, but to the care with which you treat him, David said. He comes home talking about Miss Emily with genuine admiration. And how he talks about his dad, Emily retorted with a smile. Yesterday he told me that when he grows up he wants to build beautiful houses for special people, just like Dad. David felt his eyes mist slightly. He said that? He did. And when I asked what kind of special people, he replied, people who need a safe place to be happy. That boy, David murmured, moved. He's a reflection of the education he receives at home, Emily said. You're raising not just a son, but an empathetic and aware human being. When the meeting finally ended, they walked together to the school gate in comfortable silence. The sun was already setting, painting the New York sky with shades of orange and pink that reflected off the surrounding buildings. Emily, David said when they reached the gate, I'd like to invite you to dinner. Somewhere neutral where we can talk more about us. Emily hesitated for a few seconds, weighing the implications. Would it be appropriate? We are two single adults who are interested in each other, David said. I think we have the right to explore this as long as we keep Ethan protected from any negative consequences. You're right, Emily agreed. How about Saturday night? I know a small restaurant in Greenpoint where we can talk privately. Perfect, David said, feeling a teenage joy. Can I pick you up at home? Yes, Emily replied, blushing slightly. Around 8. 8 o'clock sharp, David confirmed. They said goodbye with a handshake that lingered a few seconds longer than necessary, and David drove back home with a sense of anticipation he hadn't felt in years. That night, while helping Ethan with his homework, David found himself smiling for no apparent reason. Dad, you're different today, Ethan observed, looking up from his math notebook. Different how? Happier, like when we finished putting together those difficult puzzles. David laughed at his son's peculiar comparison. That's a good way to describe it, champ. Sometimes we find pieces that fit perfectly when we least expect it. Saturday arrived, filled with a sweet anxiety that David hadn't experienced in years. He spent the morning trying to focus on normal activities with Ethan. Breakfast at the Italian bakery, a walk through Brooklyn organizing toys. but his mind kept drifting to the upcoming evening. "Dad, you're acting weird today," Ethan observed. While organizing their books on the shelf in the bedroom, David noticed how impossible it was to hide any emotional change from an observant child like Ethan. "You've looked in the mirror about 10 times just this morning," David laughed. "I'm fine, son, just thoughtful." "Thoughtful about what?" David hesitated, carefully choosing his words. Ever since Sarah had left, he and Ethan maintained a careful honesty in their relationship. Enough for the boy to feel included in his father's life, but protected from adult emotional complexities. "You know, Ethan, tonight I'm having dinner with Miss Helena," David said, sitting on the bed next to his son. Ethan stopped organizing the books and looked at his father with sudden interest. "Are you going to talk about me?" "Not exactly. We're having dinner as friends." Ethan frowned, processing the information with the seriousness characteristic of children trying to understand the adult world. "Like the friends in movies who like each other." David was surprised by his son's insight. "Why do you ask that?" "Because when you talk about Ms. Helena, your eyes look different, just like when you look at those old buildings you really like." David smiled, touched by the comparison. "And how do you feel about that?" Ethan considered the question for a few moments, demonstrating the emotional maturity that always surprised David. "Ms. Helena is nice. She understands me when the words get confusing, and she always smiles genuinely, not that adult smile when they want to be polite." "And what if I liked her in a special way?" "Like a girlfriend?" Ethan asked directly. "Maybe, hypothetically." Ethan moved closer to his father and hugged him. "I think you deserve to have someone who makes you smile like you make me smile." David felt his eyes moisten. "You're amazing, you know that." "Genetic inheritance," Ethan replied with a mischievous smile, using an expression he had learned from watching science documentaries with his dad. Later, while Ethan spent time at Michael and his wife Carla's house, they had offered to take care of the boy, David faced the dilemma of what to wear. 3 years ago, his only sartorial concerns involved work meetings or Ethan's school events. The idea of dressing up to impress a woman felt both exciting and terrifying. He opted for a light blue dress shirt that Michael had given him for Christmas, which still had the tags, on dark jeans and the navy blazer he only wore on special occasions. Looking in the mirror, he recognized the man he had been before fully embracing fatherhood, someone who still believed in romantic possibilities. The address that Ms. Helena had given was directly across from the Italian bakery, confirming yet another of the coincidences that seemed to connect their lives in a nearly magical way. David parked on the street and looked at the Copacabana building for the first time with the eyes of an architect and secret admirer of its resident. The building was indeed a gem of art. Deco architecture. 5 stories of elegant, symmetrical lines with geometric decorative elements on the facade and large windows that gave lightness to the structure. The balconies had wrought iron railings with designs reminiscent of the golden years of Brazilian architecture. David could imagine the carnival balls that Ms. Helena had mentioned, the elegance of the 1940s echoing through the hallways and rooms. At exactly 8 o'clock, he rang the intercom for apartment 4B. "Hi, David," came Ms. Helena's voice, filled with nervousness and anticipation. "I'm coming down." During the 5 minutes he waited in the entrance hall, David observed the building's internal details. The floor was Carrara marble with geometric patterns. There were colorful stained glass windows in the hall, and the old elevator still operated with a handcrafted iron gate. It was a building that had preserved its original personality, just like the constructions he dedicated himself to restoring. When Miss Helena appeared in the hall, David needed a few seconds to process the transformation. She wore a midi dress in emerald green that highlighted her eyes, low-heeled sandals and an elegant beige blazer. Her hair was down, falling in natural waves over her shoulders, and she had applied subtle makeup that accentuated her naturally delicate features. "You look beautiful," David said, genuinely impressed. Helena blushed slightly. "Thank you. You look very dapper, too." They walked together through the streets of Greenpoint, which on Saturday night had a special energy. Street performers entertained at the corners, couples strolled hand in hand, and the restaurants displayed their tables on the sidewalk, creating a European atmosphere in the heart of New York. "Where are we going?" David asked. "A special place," Helena replied, guiding him down a side street. "It's called Grandma Lucy's. It's small, family-run, and has the best pasta in the area." The restaurant was just as Helena had described, small, with only 10 tables, walls decorated with black and white photographs of Italy, and an aroma of basil and garlic that filled the air. The owner, an elderly Italian woman with grey hair and a warm smile, greeted Helena like an old friend. "Helena, cara mia, long time no see," exclaimed Grandma Lucy, embracing her affectionately. "And who is this handsome boy?" "Grandma Lucy, this is David. David, this is Grandma Lucy, who makes the best lasagna in New York." "Pleasure, David," said the woman, warmly shaking his hand. "Any friend of Helena is welcome here." They were led to a candle-lit table in the corner, overlooking the small open kitchen, where Grandma Lucy and her son prepared the dishes with movements choreographed by experience. "How did you discover this place?" David asked, admiring the authenticity of the environment. "Michael brought me here 2 years ago," Helena explained. "He works at the bakery next door and became friends with Grandma Lucy. She adopted him as her honorary grandson and always saves a special dish for him. So Michael works nearby, at St. Benedict Bakery, 3 blocks from here. It's one of the few bakeries in the city that hires people with special needs and truly invests in their development." Helena smiled with pride. "Michael is responsible for the entire dessert section. He has a special talent for working with sugar." David was touched by the affectionate way Helena spoke about her brother. It must be rewarding to see him grow professionally. "It's one of the greatest joys of my life," confirmed Helena, "especially because he found not just a job, but a passion." Grandma Lucy brought an appetizer and a bottle of Italian red wine, insisting it was a gift from the house for the special new customers. As they sampled olives, cheeses, and artisanal cured meats, David and Helena found themselves gradually relaxing, setting aside the initial tension of their first meeting. "Can I confess something?" Helena said, taking a small sip of wine. "Of course. I was terrified about this dinner. It's been so long since I've gone out with someone that I almost cancelled 3 times today." David laughed. "I was nervous all day, too. Ethan had to calm me down, if you can imagine." "Does Ethan know we're having dinner together?" "Yes, and he approved," said David, recounting the morning conversation with his son. Helena was touched to hear how Ethan had reacted. "He really is special. He has a rare emotional intelligence for an 8-year-old. I think the learning difficulties made him more attuned to people's feelings," David reflected. "As he has to work harder to understand words, he developed other types of perception." "Exactly. That's something I often observe in children with dyslexia. They compensate for textual difficulties with above-average sensory and emotional skills." Grandma Lucy brought the main course, eggplant lasagna, with homemade tomato sauce and fresh basil. The first taste transported David directly to the childhood vacations he spent at relatives' houses in a small town in the Midwest. "This lasagna reminds me of my childhood," he said, savoring it slowly. "Tell me about your childhood," Helena asked, resting her chin on her hand as she watched him. David began describing the simple house where he grew up, the hard-working parents who sacrificed everything for their son's education, the afternoons spent helping his dad with small home repairs that sparked his interest in construction. Helena listened attentively, asking questions that showed genuine interest in understanding his origins. "And you?" David asked. "What was it like growing up in Springfield?" Helena described a middle-class childhood, dedicated parents focused on education, the arrival of Michael when she was 6, and how that experience shaped her worldview. She talked about the decision to move to New York to study education, the difficult early years living in a student dormitory, and her specialization in special education. "When did I realize I wanted to dedicate myself to children with special needs?" She repeated the question David had asked. "It was during an internship at a public school in the outskirts. I met a 7-year-old girl with autism that no one could reach. I spent weeks observing, trying to understand her way of communicating. And did you succeed?" "I discovered she responded to music. She didn't speak, but she hummed complex melodies. We created a way to communicate through songs, and in 2 months she was interacting with other children." Helena smiled at the memory. "That's when I understood my calling was to find the unique keys for each child." David noticed how Helena's face lit up when she spoke about education. It was the same passion he felt when talking about architectural restoration, that dedication that transcends profession and becomes a life purpose. "You know what impresses me most about you," David said. "What?" "The way you manage to maintain hope and optimism while working with children who face so many challenges. Isn't it emotionally heavy?" Helena considered the question as she finished her wine. "Sometimes it is challenging, yes, but every small victory, like Ethan reading a new word or an autistic child making eye contact for the first time, makes all the tough moments worth it." "It's like restoration," David reflected. "Sometimes I spend months working on details that no one else will notice, but when I see the building regain its original personality, I know it was all worth the effort." "We work with rebirth," Helena said thoughtfully. "You bring life back to buildings. I help children discover their own abilities." "I never thought of it that way, but you're right." Grandma Lucy brought dessert, homemade tiramisu, accompanied by 2 espressos that filled the table with the intense aroma of Italian coffee. The conversation flowed naturally, jumping from professional topics to personal memories, literary preferences, and future dreams. "Helena," David said as he was on his 2nd cup of coffee, "can I ask about past relationships, if it's not too intrusive?" Helena hesitated briefly before answering. "I've had a few serious relationships, but I could never find someone who understood my dedication to special education. Most men thought I was wasting time with children who would never be normal." David felt a wave of indignation. How can they think that way? "Unfortunately, it's more common than you might imagine. I've heard phrases like, 'You should work with typically developing children, you'd have a better professional future.'" Helena sighed. "I realized I needed someone who not only tolerated but shared my values." "And me?" Helena asked. "I imagine it's hard to find someone willing to accept the responsibility of a relationship that includes Ethan." David nodded. "Exactly. The few times I tried to date, women seemed to see Ethan as an obstacle, not as an integral part of who I am." "That's absurd," Helena said sincerely. "Ethan is one of the most admirable things about you. Anyone who can't see that doesn't deserve to be part of your lives." David felt something shift deeply in his chest. "Helena, yes, you are the first person who talks about Ethan as if he were a gift, not a problem." Helena reached across the table and gently touched David's fingers. "Because he is a gift, to you, to me, to the world." The touch, simple yet loaded with meaning, created a moment of intimacy that completely transformed the atmosphere between them. David turned his hand up, intertwining his fingers with hers. David held Emily's fingers, and they both remained like that for a few moments, absorbing the intensity of that connection. "What happens now?" Emily asked softly. "I don't know," David admitted. "But I know I don't want this night to end." Emily smiled. "Neither do I." When they finally left the restaurant, it was already past midnight. They walked slowly through the deserted streets of Greenpoint, prolonging those last moments together. The nighttime city had a special magic, golden lights reflecting in the closed shop windows, the distant echo of music coming from the bars, the smell of coffee still lingering from some 24-hour cafes. "David," Emily said when they reached her building, "thank you for tonight. It was perfect. It was perfect for me, too." They stood at the entrance of the building, neither wanting to be the first to say goodbye. The romantic tension that had built up throughout the night peaked, creating a moment of anticipation that seemed to suspend time. "Can I see you again?" David asked. "Yes," Emily replied without hesitation. "Very soon." David leaned in slightly, and Emily lifted her face. The first kiss was soft, shy, filled with 3 years of loneliness from both sides. When they pulled away, they were both smiling. "Good night, Emily." "Good night, David." David drove back home with a sense of completeness he hadn't felt in years. Meanwhile, Emily floated up to her apartment, already planning how she would tell Michael about that special night. They both knew they had crossed an irreversible line, and their lives would never be the same again. Monday arrived with a different energy for David. For the first time in years, he woke up before the alarm, genuinely eager to start the day. While preparing breakfast, he found himself humming an Italian song he had heard at Grandma Lucy's restaurant, and Ethan quickly noticed the change. "Dad, you're singing," Ethan remarked, appearing in the kitchen already dressed for school, his hair still messy from sleep. "Am I?" David asked, unconsciously smiling. "And you're?" "Smiling like those movie characters who discover treasures," the boy added, sitting at the table with the insight that always surprised David. During the drive to school, Ethan casually asked questions about dinner with Ms. Emily, showing a natural curiosity without being intrusive. David answered honestly but appropriately for his son's age, explaining that they had talked about many interesting things and that he would like to see her again. "She's special, isn't she, Dad?" Ethan asked as they reached the school gate. "Very special," David confirmed. In the schoolyard, David instinctively looked for Emily, but didn't find her among the teachers welcoming the children. A mix of disappointment and anxiety washed over him. Perhaps she regretted the dinner. Maybe things had moved too quickly. During the morning at the office, David struggled to concentrate on projects. Marcelo, always observant, noticed his friend's distraction. "How was dinner?" Marcelo asked, entering David's office with 2 coffees in hand. "It was amazing," David replied, unable to hide his smile. "Given your state today, I imagine it was much more than amazing," Marcelo joked. "How long has it been since I've seen you like this?" "About 3 years." David sighed. "She's different. Marcelo, she's smart, caring, understands Ethan in a way I've never seen, and last night we discovered we have much more in common than we thought." "That's great, David. You deserve to be happy again." Marcelo settled into the chair across from his friend's desk. "But can I give you advice from someone who has known you for 15 years? "Of course. Take it slow. I know you tend to dive in completely when you find something you value. That's how you work. That's how you raise Ethan. But relationships need time to develop naturally." David considered his friend's words. "You're right. It's just that it's been so long since I've felt this connection with someone. And that's wonderful. I'm just saying to enjoy the process, let things flow without rushing. At 10:30 in the morning, David's phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize. "Hello? David? It's Emily," came the familiar voice, but with a slightly tense tone. David's heart raced. "Emily, hi. How are you?" "Yes, I'm fine. Sorry to call at work. I got your number from the school secretary." She paused. "Do you have a few minutes to talk?" "Of course, always," David signaled to Marcelo, who discreetly left the room. "It's about last night," Emily began, and David felt his stomach tighten. "It was perfect, and I don't want you to misinterpret what I'm about to say." "I'm listening," David said, mentally preparing for rejection. "I need to be transparent about some things in my life before this goes too far," Emily continued. "There are situations that could complicate a relationship, and you deserve to know about them." David relaxed slightly. It wasn't a rejection, but a serious conversation. "Emily, you can tell me anything." "First, about Michael. He doesn't just live with me. I'm his legal guardian. Our parents are aging, and 2 years ago we decided together that it would be better for him to come to New York." Emily's voice carried a mix of affection and concern. "This means that anyone who gets involved with me needs to understand that Michael is an integral part of the equation." "Emily," David said gently, "last night you told me that anyone who saw Ethan as an obstacle didn't deserve to be part of our lives. The same goes for Michael. He's not a complication. He's family." David heard Emily sigh, with relief on the other end of the line. "Thank you for understanding. But there's more. I'm still listening. I have some personal issues that I'm still working through. 6 months ago, I ended a 2-year relationship. It was hard, and while I know I was right to end it, I'm still processing some things." David felt a pang of jealousy. Emily tried to suppress it immediately. "Do you want to talk about it?" Emily hesitated. It was a relationship that seemed perfect on paper. He was a lawyer, successful, intelligent, but he could never truly accept my dedication to Ethan and my work in special education. For 2 years, I tried to convince him that these things were important to me, and he always said he understood, but his actions showed the opposite. What happened? He gave me an ultimatum: Ethan or him. He said I needed to choose between being a sister or being a woman, as if they were mutually exclusive. Emily's voice became firmer. "That's when I realized he never truly loved me, just a version of me that existed only in his imagination." David felt a wave of admiration for Emily. "And you chose Ethan." "It wasn't really a choice. Ethan is my family, my responsibility, my joy. Any man who can't see that doesn't deserve my time." "Emily," David said, "can I ask you a question?" "Of course." "Why are you telling me this now? I mean, I appreciate the honesty, but because last night I realized you are different. The way you talk about Ethan, how you understand my professional motivations, how you see the world." Emily paused. "And because I don't want to repeat the mistake of getting involved with someone without being completely honest about who I am." David smiled even though she couldn't see it. "I really appreciate your honesty. And can I reciprocate?" "Please." "I've also come from a complicated relationship. Sarah, Ethan's mother, left me 3 years ago. One day she simply decided she wasn't cut out to be a mother and left." David took a deep breath. "For a long time, I blamed myself. Thought that maybe if I had been different, more present, more something, she would have stayed." "David, let me finish," he gently requested. "It took me 2 years to understand that some people are just not ready for certain responsibilities, and that's not a failure of those who remain. But since then, I've built walls to protect Ethan and myself from further disappointments." And now? Now I've found someone who not only accepts Ethan, but celebrates him. Someone who understands family dedication because they live the same situation. Someone who... David hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Someone worth tearing down those walls for. Emily was silent for a few seconds. When she spoke again, her voice was heavy with emotion. David, are you sure you're ready for this? To get involved with someone who has the complications that I do? Emily, I'm 42 years old. I've been raising a special needs child alone for 3 years, and I work preserving things that most people consider worthless. My whole life is complicated. The difference is that now I've found someone whose complications fit perfectly with mine. Emily laughed, a sound between relief and joy. When you put it that way, can I make a proposal? David asked. I'm listening. How about we get to know each other's complications? You can introduce Ethan and I can show you what our routine with Gabriel is like. Let's see if our families blend, as well as we do. That would be perfect, Emily agreed. How about next weekend? Ethan loves meeting new people, and I imagine Gabriel would be curious to meet my brother. It's a deal. But Emily, yes? No matter what happens, I want you to know that last night was one of the most special nights I've had in years. You reminded me of things about myself that I had forgotten. It was special for me too, Emily replied softly. Very special. When they ended the call, David leaned back in his chair, feeling a mix of nervousness and anticipation. The coming weeks would determine whether the connection they had discovered could turn into something lasting and real. Michael returned to the room a few minutes later, finding David looking out the window with a thoughtful expression. Are you okay? Michael asked. Better than okay, David replied. I think I found someone who understands that true love isn't about ease. It's about finding someone whose difficulties fit perfectly with yours. That's very philosophical for a Monday morning, Michael joked, but from the look on your face, I imagine it's a philosophy that's working. David smiled. It's working perfectly. That afternoon, when he picked up Ethan from school, he found Emily talking with other teachers in the playground. Their eyes met for a moment, and she offered him a discreet but meaningful smile, the kind of smile that carries promises and shared secrets. Ethan ran towards his dad, holding a piece of paper decorated with colorful drawings. Dad, look what Ms. Emily helped me make. It's a thank you card for you, for being the best dad in the world. David examined the drawing, a male figure and a smaller one holding hands under a radiant sun and next to a house that suspiciously resembled one of the buildings he had restored. It's beautiful, champ. I'll keep it with great care. As they walked towards the car, Ethan casually commented, Ms. Emily said she has a brother who also likes to draw. Do you think we can meet him someday? David smiled, realizing how Emily was carefully laying the groundwork for the next steps. I think so, buddy. Very soon. That night, while helping Ethan with his homework, David reflected on how life could change quickly. A week ago, his biggest concern was balancing work and fatherhood. Now, he was contemplating the possibility of expanding his family from 2 to 4 people, and the idea, instead of frightening him, filled him with a warm anticipation he hadn't felt in years. The future, for the first time in a long time, seemed full of bright possibilities. Saturday dawned with a crystal blue sky, typical of autumn days in New York, when the pollution takes a break and the city breathes more easily. David woke up at 7 in the morning with a mix of anxiety and expectation that David, had been looking forward to meeting Michael since. He had arranged with Emily to introduce their families to each other. Ethan, who usually needed to be woken up on Saturdays, appeared in the kitchen even before his dad finished making the coffee. Dad, is today the day to meet Michael? he asked, his eyes shining with curiosity. "Yes, champ. Are you nervous?" Ethan thought for a few seconds, showing the seriousness he typically displayed when considering important questions. "A little. What if he doesn't like me?" David knelt down to be at eye level with his son. "Ethan, remember what we always talk about special people. That everyone is special in their own way? Exactly. Michael is special in a different way, just like you are special with the words that sometimes get mixed up. But the most important thing is that he has a good heart, just like your sister. Miss Emily. That's right, and I'm sure you two will get along great." They had agreed to meet at Central Park at 10 in the morning. Emily had suggested a neutral and spacious location where Michael would feel comfortable, and Ethan could run freely if he got anxious. The plan was to stroll through the park, have lunch at a nearby cafe by the lake, and then maybe visit the Museum of Modern Art, which Michael loved because of the sculptures. When they arrived at the main gate of the park, David spotted Emily sitting on a bench near the entrance, animatedly talking to a tall, sturdy man with brown hair and a wide smile. Michael was wearing a blue t-shirt with a cupcake design and jeans, gesturing expressively as he spoke. "That must be them," David said, discreetly pointing. Ethan watched Michael for a few moments. "He looks happy," he commented, which David interpreted as a good sign. As they approached, Emily stood up with a nervous but warm smile. "David, Ethan, I want to introduce you to my brother, Michael," she said, her voice filled with affection and pride. Michael approached with confident strides, extending his hand to David with a genuine smile that lit up his whole face. "Nice to meet you, David. Emily can't stop talking about you," said Michael, with the disarming honesty typical of people with Down syndrome. "You're the guy who renovates old houses, right?" David warmly shook Michael's hand, immediately captivated by his open and affectionate personality. "That's right. Michael, and you must be the dessert expert that Emily told me about." "I am. I make the best chocolate truffles at St. Benedict Bakery," Michael replied with evident pride. He then bent down to be at Ethan's level. "And you must be the Ethan that Emily always talks about. Do you like to draw?" Ethan, initially shy, was gradually won over by Michael's positive energy. "I do. I draw houses and buildings just like my dad." "That's cool. I draw cupcakes and cakes. Want to see?" Michael asked, pulling out a small notebook filled with colorful drawings of elaborate sweets. Ethan leaned in, fascinated by the detailed drawings. "Wow, that's beautiful. Can you make all those desserts?" "Most of them, yes. I work at a bakery and come up with new recipes every week." David and Emily exchanged a relieved and touched glance, observing how the two connected instantly through their shared interest in art and creation. "How about we start our walk?" Emily suggested. As they walked along the tree-lined paths of the park, a natural dynamic established itself. Michael and Ethan walked ahead, chatting excitedly about drawings and recipes, while David and Emily followed a few steps behind. "Michael is really enjoying Ethan," Emily whispered to David. "I rarely see him connect so quickly with someone." "Ethan is also enchanted," David replied. "He won't stop asking questions about the desserts." Michael, who had overheard the conversation, turned to them. "Emily, can I teach Ethan how to make chocolate truffles someday?" "If his parents allow it, of course you can," Emily replied, looking questioningly at David. "That would be great," David agreed. "Ethan loves learning new things." "That's true, Dad. Can I learn?" Ethan asked, bouncing with excitement. During lunch at the cafe in the park, a relaxed and familial atmosphere settled among the four. Michael shared funny stories about his co-workers at the bakery, Ethan shared some of his school adventures, and David and Emily found themselves watching the natural interaction between the brother and son with deep satisfaction. "Michael," Ethan asked during dessert, "is it true that you live with Miss Emily?" Yes, we've lived together for 2 years. She takes care of me, and I take care of her too, Michael replied simply. It's really nice to have family around. Ethan looked thoughtfully at David. Dad, it would be nice to have more family around, wouldn't it? David nearly choked on his soda, realizing the direction the conversation was taking. Emily blushed slightly, but smiled at the innocence of the question. Families can grow in many ways, David replied carefully. The important thing is that people love and care for each other. Just like you four now? Ethan asked, with the insight that always surprised adults. Michael laughed loudly. Ethan, you're very smart. Emily, he is just like you said, very intelligent. After lunch, they visited the Museum of Modern Art. Michael knew every sculpture in the outdoor garden and told Ethan the stories he had invented about each one. Ethan was particularly fascinated by an abstract metal sculpture that Michael had nicknamed the Dragon Who Became Nice. Why did he become nice? Ethan asked, circling the sculpture to see it from all angles. Because he found out that scaring people didn't make him happy, Michael explained seriously. So he decided to use his fire to light bonfires where people could warm up and make s'mores. David watched Emily as she listened to her brother tell the story, her eyes shining with pride and tenderness. The deep love between the two siblings was evident, a love that was not based on pity or obligation, but on genuine admiration and companionship. Emily, David said quietly, while Michael and Ethan explored another sculpture. Michael is amazing. Now I understand where his sensitivity for working with special needs children comes from. He teaches me every day, replied Emily, about acceptance, about finding joy in simple things, about loving unconditionally. And Ethan is learning that too, just by being with him this afternoon. They have a special connection, don't they? Emily observed. I think it's because they both know what it's like to be different and special. At the same time, during the afternoon as they walked through the museum gardens, David noticed how Ethan had transformed in Michael's company. The boy was more uninhibited, asking questions without fear of seeming different, laughing loudly at the stories Michael invented. It was as if, in the presence of someone who celebrated their own differences, Ethan felt free to be completely himself. David, said Michael as they were getting ready to leave, can you come over for dinner someday? I make a beef stroganoff that's famous at the bakery. David looked at Emily, who nodded with an encouraging smile. It would be a pleasure, Michael. And Ethan can come too. I can teach him how to make chocolate cake, Michael added, spontaneously hugging the boy. Ethan warmly returned the hug. Michael, you're really cool. When I grow up, I want to work in a bakery just like you. I'll teach you everything I know, Michael promised, and you can teach me how to draw houses. By the end of the afternoon, as they said goodbye at the park gate, there was a palpable sense that something important had happened. Not only had David and Emily grown closer, but two families had recognized and embraced each other. Ethan, David asked during the ride home, what did you think of Michael? He's the kind of person who makes you feel special just the way you are, Ethan replied thoughtfully. And now I understand why Miss Emily is so good at doing that too. David smiled, once again impressed by his son's insight. Would you like to see them again? Very much. Michael promised to teach me how to make chocolate cake. And Dad? Yes? I think Miss Emily gets happy when you're around. Her eyes shine differently. David felt his heart race. And how do you feel about that? Ethan considered the question seriously. I think our family was a bit small, just the two of us. Maybe it's time to grow a little. That night, when Ethan was already asleep, David received a message from Emily. Thank you for today. Michael won't stop talking about Ethan and about you. I think we found something very special. David replied, I think so too. Ethan is already planning all the sweets he wants to learn to make with Michael, and I can't stop thinking about what it would be like to have you both as part of our lives." Emily's response came quickly. "I'm thinking the same thing. How about that dinner Michael offered next Wednesday?" "Perfect," David typed. "I can't wait." As he prepared for bed, David reflected on how revealing the day had been. Not only had he met Michael and fallen in love with his charming personality, but he had seen Emily in her family environment, observing how she and her brother cared for each other with unconditional love. It was exactly the kind of family he dreamed of for Ethan, a family based on acceptance, affection, and celebration of individual differences. For the first time in 3 years, David fell asleep, imagining a future that included more people, more laughter, more love. And the feeling was absolutely perfect. Wednesday arrived, filled with an expectation unlike anything David had experienced before. It wasn't just a dinner, it was the first step toward a possible union of families, something he hadn't imagined possible since Sarah had left. Ethan spent the entire day at school talking about the dinner at Michael and Emily's house. During recess, he drew a paper with 4 figures holding hands under the title, "My New Family," which he handed to Emily with the characteristic ease of children who have not yet learned that family changes can be complicated. "What's this, Ethan?" Emily asked, examining the drawing closely. "It's us 4. You, Michael, me, and my dad. We're a family now, right?" Emily felt her heart race at the simplicity with which Ethan had accepted and embraced that new configuration. "How lovely, Ethan. Can I keep this drawing?" "Of course! It's for you to put on the refrigerator, just like my dad does with my drawings at home." At 6 in the evening, David and Ethan rang the intercom for apartment 4B at the Copacabana Apartments. Ethan carried a box of chocolates they had specially chosen for Michael, and David brought a bottle of wine and flowers for Emily. "You've arrived," came Michael's excited voice over the intercom. "We're coming down." Michael came down alone, wearing a colorful apron over a light blue dress shirt that Emily had specially chosen for the occasion. His eyes sparkled with excitement. "David, Ethan, welcome," Michael said, warmly hugging both. "Emily is finishing setting the table. Come on, I'll show you our home." The apartment was exactly as David had imagined, cozy, organized, with personal touches that revealed the personalities of its inhabitants. The main room had shelves filled with pedagogy books mixed with recipe albums, colorful potted plants scattered around the corners, and framed family photographs on the walls. Ethan was immediately fascinated by an entire shelf dedicated to Michael's creations. Miniature cakes made of clay, elaborate candy sketchbooks, and even small sugar sculptures preserved in clear containers. "Wow, Michael, did you make all this?" Ethan asked, his eyes wide with admiration. "I did. This one was my first real cake," Michael said, pointing to a framed photo where he appeared at 20 years old, proudly smiling, aside of a 3-tier chocolate cake. "Emily helped me decorate." Emily appeared from the kitchen at that moment, wearing a casual dark green dress and an apron that matched Michael's. Her hair was styled in a relaxed bun, and she radiated a domestic tranquility that David found absolutely charming. "David, it's great to see you," she said, gently kissing him on the cheek. "Ethan, I hope you like beef stroganoff because Michael really outdid himself today." "I love beef stroganoff," Ethan exclaimed. "My dad makes it too, but he says it never turns out like Grandma's." "Oh, then I have to impress you guys," Michael joked. "David, do you want to see how I make it? I can teach you the secrets." For the next 30 minutes, David found himself in the kitchen with Michael, learning culinary techniques that the young man had developed during his 3 years working at the bakery. Emily and Ethan set the dining table, chatting about the boy's progress in reading. "Michael," David said as he watched the young man season the meat with professional precision, "you really have a talent for this. It's impressive." "Thanks." You know, at first I was scared to work at the bakery, Michael confided. I thought people would laugh at me. But my boss, Mr. Johnson, told me that what matters is not who you are, but the love you put into what you do. David was touched by the young man's simple yet profound philosophy. And you put a lot of love into the kitchen. It's easy to see. Emily taught me that when we do things with love, they become special for those who receive them, Michael continued. That's why she's the best teacher in the world. Everything she does for the kids is done with love. During dinner, a familiar atmosphere naturally settled in. Michael shared hilarious stories about his co-workers, Ethan shared his adventures at school, and David and Emily found themselves exchanging meaningful glances as they observed the harmonious interaction between the brother and son. "Michael," Ethan asked during dessert, a flan that Michael had specially prepared for him, "have you always wanted to work in a bakery?" "Actually, when I was little, I wanted to be a clown," Michael laughed. "But then I discovered that making sweets also makes people smile, so it's almost the same thing. That's cool. Sometimes I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. Sometimes I think about being an engineer like my dad, and sometimes I think about being a teacher like Emily." "Why not both?" suggested Michael. "You could build special schools for kids like us." Ethan lit up at the idea. "That's true. I can do that." David felt a wave of emotion as he observed how Michael, unknowingly, had just opened up a universe of possibilities for Ethan. It was the kind of conversation that shaped children's dreams. After dinner, while Michael and Ethan played with puzzles in the living room, David helped Emily wash the dishes in the kitchen. The domestic intimacy of the moment, her washing, him drying, quietly chatting about trivial matters, created a sense of naturalness that surprised them both. "Emily," David said while drying a plate, "thank you for tonight, for letting Ethan and me be part of your family, even if temporarily." Emily stopped washing and turned to face him. "David, there's nothing temporary about this for me." "It's not for me either," David admitted, placing the dish towel on the counter. "In fact, since I met you, I've started to imagine what it would be like to have a real family again." "A real family?" "You, Michael, Ethan, and me. Dinners like this every week. Michael teaching Ethan to cook. You helping him with his homework. David hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I taking care of all of you." Emily stepped closer to him, her eyes shining with a mix of hope and vulnerability. "David, are you sure? Is it just loneliness talking?" "Emily, loneliness is what I've felt for 3 years. This," he said, gesturing toward the living room where Michael and Ethan were laughing together, "this is the opposite of loneliness. This is home." Emily gently touched his face. "For me, it's home too." David kissed her softly, a kiss that sealed not only the love between them, but the promise of a family united by choice and mutual affection. "Hey, you two," came Michael's voice from the living room, filled with amusement. "Ethan wants to know if you guys are going to date like in the movies." David and Emily pulled apart, laughing at the direct question. "Let's talk to them," Emily said, intertwining her fingers with David's. In the living room, they found Michael and Ethan sitting on the sofa, both with expectant expressions. "Ethan, Michael," David began, "Emily and I want to talk to you about something important." "Are you guys going to get married?" Ethan asked directly. David and Emily exchanged an amused glance. "Well, we haven't gotten to that part yet," Emily said, "but we want to know how you would feel if we decided to date seriously." "Like you guys becoming a real family?" Michael asked. "That's right," David confirmed. Ethan and Michael looked at each other and, in a perfect display of synchronization, smiled widely. "That would be awesome," Ethan exclaimed. "Michael could be my big brother, and Emily would be... she would be..." She would be like a mum to you, and David would be like a dad to me, Michael completed, hugging Ethan. The four of us together. Emily felt her eyes welling up. So, you guys would approve? We approve, they both said in unison. David and Emily embraced, sealing that moment that marked the official beginning of a new family, a chosen family built on love, acceptance, and the deep understanding that individual differences were not obstacles, but unique gifts that each person brought to the whole. When David and Ethan finally said goodbye, it was already past 10 at night. Ethan fell asleep in the car on the way home, a peaceful smile on his face and a small package of chocolate truffles that Michael had specially prepared for him. "Dad," Ethan murmured sleepily when David